I'm in this country park here in Cheshire, and it's quite nice. It's not as sunny as it was yesterday, but it's quite nice. And and I can't really complain. I can't complain generally, really, because obviously I've got my health more or less. Occasionally get backache because I've got a small back injury, and I do suffer from mouth ulcers quite a bit. Apart from that, I can't really complain. But at the same time, I am aware that a lot of other people, probably the majority of people in the world, more than half the people in the world, have got serious things to complain about. They're either starving or dying some horrible disease, or they're in terrible straits, suffering oppression of one kind or another. And that's just the people. Animals are having a terrible time of it, it seems to me. Seem to spend most of their lives in a state of mild panic and anxiety about where the next meal's coming from. When they're not doing that, they're sleeping, trying to get their energy back together for the next round in the great battle of life. So I am kind of aware of that, really, and it does make me feel a bit weird sometimes. It's a bit like what's it called, survivor syndrome. I think survivor syndrome is that it's some kind of psychological syndrome that people get, apparently, if they have some. Come on, Phoebe, out off the road, you twit. If they suffer a loss, if a sibling dies, something like that, or if they've been in a situation where lots of their friends and family have died and they're the only survivor. I think some Holocaust survivors suffered from survivor syndrome, and it's this strange feeling of unworthiness, I guess. I'm trying to think of that guy, Jewish author who wrote the periodic table. I can't remember. Anyway, he was a Holocaust survivor and he killed himself a few years back. So even years and years afterwards, he was still kind of haunted with the knowledge that in that particular case, millions of other people who were, at least from the oppressor's point of view, were interchangeable with himself, had been killed, and he'd survived, and you just couldn't live with that knowledge any longer. And there's a sense in which, I wouldn't want to trivialise that event, of course, but there is a sense in which I think, maybe all of us, I certainly feel that sometimes, not to anything like the same extent. I'm not about to kill myself because I accidentally step on an earwig, but at the same time I am kind of aware that all this stuff around me is having a bad time of it quite a lot of the time, and a lot of humans who are genetically almost exactly the same as myself are having a really horrible life, really. And that does make me feel a bit weird about being alive. And I don't know, maybe it is just survivor syndrome. And then there's the other factor, this other, let's go this way, pup. This other stuff to do with, the fact that our own lives, mine's fine right now. It hasn't always been fine. Some parts of it have been really, really shit. And I'm sure some parts of it will be really shit again. And it'll probably end messily and painfully, because most lives seem to do that. So there's a whole raft of things around that, isn't there, really? I suppose what I think about that is, what would it take to make it worth it? What would have to happen? What secret knowledge would someone have to discover to make it worth it? To make it all make sense? You know what I mean? Like if we were to survive, and we were somehow managed to make it to the next 50 years, or 100 years, or 1,000 years, or 40,000 years, and in 40,000 years' time, we've made all these massive advances, technological, psychological advances in our knowledge. What kind of thing could we possibly have discovered which would allow us to look back and say, yeah, well, that makes sense. All that was worth it. All the suffering and anxiety that all those millions and billions of creatures endured for all those millions of years, that was all worth it, because, and then that's where the 3 dots go with the answer written on. What would have to happen now? You know what I mean? Like what would we have to find out about the way the universe works now to make it worth it? I mean, maybe nothing, maybe it's just impossible. You know, like if I was let me give an example of that. Like if I was a cell in my own body, I know it sounds weird, but if I was a cell, a skin cell, and somehow I was sentient, and I was thinking, God, it's really shitty being a cell, I've got a really short lifespan, I'm going to be sloughed off in a minute and just fall to the ground and be consumed, and all my fluids will leak through my membranes. Really horrible being a skin cell. If I was thinking that kind of thing. If someone said, ah yes, but Fred, you're a skin cell in part of this fantastically complex sentient organism which has this brain and it does all this stuff in the world. I mean, part of the fact I wouldn't be able to understand what I was talking about. I mean, would I be so impressed at that point that I think, oh yeah, oh, okay, that makes sense. Being a skin cell is fine. You know, if I was to discover that this life that I'm having and this life that these trees and these dogs and these other people are having is all part of some great pantheistic, panpsychic, single organismic entity, which it isn't, but let's just be clear about that. But let's just say we were to find that, and we're all actually cells of some multidimensional being. You know, how cool would that being have to be to make it worthwhile? I mean, it would have to be, presumably, it would have to be as far beyond, in advance of, improved upon, far better, as much better than our individual existence is, then our individual existence is better than being a skin cell. It'd have to be at least that kind of a ratio to make it even begin to be worthwhile. You know, whatever that organism, that multi-dimensional organism, or that fantastically evolved organism at the end of time was, it would have to have something that was so different to a central nervous system, so much more complex and more interesting, that it made this central nervous system we've got with all its pains and pleasures trivial, a minor detail, as insignificant as the flow of, you know, the osmotic pressure between the inside and the outside of a cell wall. Just part of the mechanism, not significant at all. Can't imagine that somehow. Of course, it might be just a failure of my imagination. Probably is, actually.